I'm going to go to Donya. Are we moving too fast?
So how do I answer that?
And are people getting
Yes,
left behind? Second part of that question, are people getting left behind potentially?
I think it comes back to, are we considering the basic human psychology on both the developing side and the user? I think that's the fundamental. Often it's, if not overlooked, it's oversimplified. So when you're looking at the developing side, are we looking at the user-centered, purpose-driven tools? Are we thinking about how the output is actually explained to the user? And from the user side, again, going back to the attitude problem, are we disengaging the human cognitives by making these tools? So, well, don't get me wrong, I'm a huge admirer of what these tools are capable of. The computational power of these tools. Some of these tools are incredible. But I think it comes back to, does that lead into de-skilling? Does that lead into losing that heuristic processes, the rule of thumbs, getting a sense of an engineering understanding of those outputs? And all of that comes back to human psychology. Generally, it's often in designing these tools and the using of these tools are not properly looked at. I think we are in some ways not moving fast enough with the pace of change, especially looking at the education side. I don't think we are adapting at whether that is because not necessarily complacent, but there is so much flexibility you have in designing a program, really. So do you get rid of the programs altogether and just come up with a new program and call it entirely different?
Program in this case being an
educational program. No. So, you know, your average BEng and civil engineering, structural engineering programs.
Yeah, I suggest it might be the rate of learning that we can deal with. And then we come to this generational thing that different generations can probably learn at different rates. So do you inevitably have the older members of society getting left behind? Is that just a matter of progress?
But I wonder if it's not just the generations, but is it also different diverse groups? You know,
Yes.
we're looking at costs, you know, people from lower income backgrounds, and they struggle. I've got a friend of mine from a suburb of Birmingham who's, you know, a lot of these AI tools for him were quite a shock. You know, I showed him image generation tool and was like, well, look at what someone could do to that, to use that against you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think it's just, is there a wider education piece? I think the one thing I find in conversations around digital groups is we're all skewed because we all work in this stuff. And we sort of, is it, you know, in many ways, a bit like the technology companies in Silicon Valley. Are we driving away and forgetting that there's 95% of the world behind us that, you know, don't do this stuff?
I would say one of the bits that I think is going to be fascinating for everybody, kind of moving forward, is when people start talking about AI and dreaming, like people jump straight to, you know, the idea of what's AI in 20 years or something like that. But if you imagine kind of the current tool sets advancing, but they have really limited functionality. So in a few years' time, there might be one aspect of your job that is like a superpower. You know, it can be done instantly, but then other parts of you know, it just doesn't apply to every, you know, these are very specific tools and they're not general purpose. And so certain parts of if your project is residential, there might be a million things that, you know, it just can be done but then as soon as you step onto a slightly more challenging set of circumstances, all of a sudden, all of these superpowers that you had disappear and you have to go back to the old world and you know, like become kind of a sitting where you've simultaneously got superpowers, but still having to do everything else the same way. And you'll jump, you know, from one project to the next, the client will be different, the conditions will be different. And it's not everything being AI powered. We're gonna be in this really weird limbo where, depending on project to project, and you know, there was a few years ago, like 10 years ago, you could see what buildings had been built with SketchUp. There was like a whole, you know, because it was limited SketchUp, and you could just see the building. That was a SketchUp building because that's where the tools were easy to use at the time. And at a certain point, when you've got a superpower that works here, and then, you know, like, how is that are people going to just want to work on the easy projects that the AI can do, or like, you know,
the opposite?
Yeah, or the opposite, or and I think there's like, because it's going to be typology specific, scope specific, risk specific, but you know, when you can or can't deploy it, and you know, some days are you going to turn up to work and do 1,000 things, and then the next day you're back in Excel, you know, feeling like a dunce.
Well, no, I mean, that's interesting, because that leads me on to another question I was going to ask.